Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. A raft of upgrades expected for the Austrian Grand Prix, and Red Bull are getting in on the act as well. Ferrari, Mercedes, potentially even McLaren bringing some changes for this upcoming weekend, but Red Bull looking to get back in the fight. Max Verstappen is not a million miles away from the championship battle after what happened back in Canada. Upgrades will look to help Verstappen and Tsunoda this weekend, and will apparently be refined for the following Grand Prix as well in Silverstone. That's not looking so good for Ferrari, but Sergio Perez also hits the media today to say that as far as he is aware, from a very reliable source internally, it seems at Red Bull, that they deeply regret the decision to axe him at the end of last season. Do you guys agree with that perspective? Very much on Twitter your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Let's start right about here with Hyundai. Now, there's been talk about the 11th Formula 1 team. There's then been talk about the 12th Formula 1 team. There was a rumour that Otmar Safnauer was trying to find a consortium of people to get involved. Presumably they would need a brand behind it. And look, all I'm saying is Hyundai put this out today. Real or not, we had you for a moment. Get ready for the ride. Hashtag Hyundai, hashtag what if, hashtag F1. And then they put this image together here. So, what do we think about this? There was a rumour a little while ago that there was interest from Hyundai in a Formula 1 an entry, and I don't think they would put this post together purely for engagement farming. Maybe they would, but with all the other factors in play, the fact that a 12th Formula 1 team has definitely been a consideration, the fact that Cadillac got in, that said, okay, actually F1 will do it, they will expand the grid. If the interest is right, if those involved are the people that they want to have involved, all that type of stuff. So that's one to stay tuned for. There's also this to note. So Barcelona pre-season testing is going to run as follows. Now, it's not just Barcelona, but it is a bit of Barcelona. 2026, there's going to be a lot of pre-season testing because these cars are brand new and they are going to be problematic. It's actually going to be a fascinating several weeks. Typically, it's been a 3-day test over the last couple of years, but for 2026, we have 3 separate tests. The Barcelona test is going to be 5 days at the end of January, so that's when the cars need to be ready for, effectively, for the teams. I'm sure they'll bring some changes throughout the different tests. That's a 5-day test, though, but apparently each of the 11 teams will be able to run for 3 of those days in total, sitting out for 2. So presumably, I'm not sure how it will work in terms of whether they are allowing all the teams on the track at the same time. Presumably they are. It's probably expected that in Barcelona that time of year, the weather may not be optimal, so that may be the reason why they're making it a 5-day test. So on some of the days that they're not as good, the teams will decide, okay, we're just not going to go today. Whereas Bahrain, it's going to be a 3-day test, Feb 11th to the 13th, and then again the very next week, and that's going to be your straightforward 3-day test as normal, but they're doing 2 of them, and the Barcelona test, right? So that's the plan for the start of 2026. There's going to be a lot to say, but at that time, it's pretty likely that Ben Sulayem will still be the president of the FIA. There was all this talk recently that Carlos Sainz Sr. was very much thinking about putting in a bid for the presidency. Then things at the FIA took an interesting step, where Ben Sulayem made some changes, which it seems have now been approved to the rules, that effectively allow him to veto potential opponents, not precisely, but various mechanisms have been introduced by which various opponents, or like opponents' potential sporting integrity, whatever it's called, into question. There was talk about, some rule changes such that Sainz Sr.'s relationship to his son, Carlos Sainz Jr. at Williams, may end up causing issues. And, the thing is, anyone who could be involved in the FIA presidency bid will have some relationship with someone at some Formula 1 team or whatever, because, they've been all in the sport for 40 plus years a lot of the time. So they're always going to have worked somewhere or known this guy or whatever. You're never going to fully get away from that potential conflict of interest, but there was a theory anyway that Ben Sulayem was trying to consolidate power so that any potential entrants would be easier to dismiss. There was also talk about having the date for applications pushed back, or pushed forward, whatever you want to say, brought forward, so that certain opponents might not be able to enter. But regardless of all of that, Carlos Sainz Sr. has at least decided for now that he will not be running. I've worked hard these past months to understand in depth the situation at the FIA and the demands and complexities that come with such an important project. After a thoughtful reflection, I've come to the conclusion that the present circumstances are not ideal to set the grounds for my candidacy. Furthermore, I have realised that properly running for president would notably compromise my preparation for the Dakar Rally. Of course he wants to do that, and I don't want to weaken my commitment to the team. These concerns have therefore inclined me to be realistic and desist from my FIA endeavour for now. I think that's the crucial thing. I think he will, put in a bid at some point, but for now he doesn't feel like it's the right time to do so. And he goes on to say a few other things as well. So, yeah, kind of a shame, I think, in general, for the community, but intrigued to your perspective in the comments below. Definitely increases the likelihood that Ben Sulayem isn't going anywhere, because Sainz Senior did feel like a credible threat. I'm sure that Ben Sulayem will be sleeping very soundly tonight. Let's talk about some of the younger drivers. Antonelli on the grid now. He's officially passed his high school exam, so congratulations to him. But Arvid Lindblad, it was confirmed today, I mentioned this a couple of days ago, that I was 99% sure that he was going to be driving an F1 car at Silverstone. That is now official, and it's Helmut Marko who's confirmed it. Now, I thought that he was going to be driving a Red Bull. They've not yet said what he's going to drive. It could be a Red Bull, it could be a Racing Bull. I think to keep in mind, this year there are 4 mandatory sessions where a driver must be replaced by a rookie for an FP1 session. Now, if you're already a rookie, that doesn't apply, right? So Hadjar will not need to be replaced, but Lawson, because he's already done a couple of previous stints, I think technically isn't a rookie by the rules, and therefore, would have to be replaced. So there's options there anyway. They could put Lindblad in the Racing Bull. It might be a sensible idea, more benign car, get to see where he stands against maybe someone like a Hadjar or something in that brief session. Of course, often when you do those testing sessions, it's not really about the performance of the driver. They've got other things they're trying to work on. But a lot of the time, especially for a new driver in the car, they're looking a fair bit about the performance of the driver. We know that Behrman, for example, had, he was at least, let's say, turning heads in some of Behrman's FP1 sessions over the last couple of years. Lindblad will look, of course, to do the same. They could, though, put him in the Red Bull. That's not an impossibility, either Max's or Yuki's. See how he gets on in there. It's obviously would be a very different kind of story, but, could you imagine they put him in Max's Red Bull? We see how he could fare against Yuki in the first free practice session. Things could get real interesting real fast. So that's something to keep an eye on as well. And this is a pretty interesting picture that we saw from 2021, where this is Lindblad getting Lando's signature, whatever, says I'll see you in 5 years. Turned out it was fewer than 5 years because he's got his super license before he's even 18. Cadillac. Bottas is the favourite now to get that drive for next year. It's possible that Perez could get the drive, or maybe both of them get the drive. These are the drivers in consideration: Drugovich, Mick Schumacher, and potentially Zhou Guanyu as well. The Zhou Guanyu one is very interesting, of course. There's a few reasons why this makes a bit of sense. Like, he's a Ferrari Academy driver still, or at least he was, but he's still part of the Ferrari program. He's the reserve driver over at the Scuderia this season. Has the exposure to the Chinese market, which could be critical for General Motors, effectively backing the Cadillac campaign. And pretty solid driver as well in his own right. Not spectacular, but I can understand why they might consider that, especially in a year where they're probably not going to win much. Let's be realistic here. Now, let's talk about Austria this weekend. Ferrari are producing a boat. Now, of course, this opens up many very easy jokes to say, well, it's not the first boat they've built over the last few years, or whatever you want to say. But they're looking for a hypersail project. Elkan was there, Vigne was there, Fred Vasseur was there. So, we do tend to see this a lot. I do find this all rather fascinating, right? Because obviously, we're not a boating channel, but it's relevant because there is a general theory that the budgets that these teams used to spend, so, Ferrari, Mercedes, they used to spend $400 million plus a year. Now the cost cap is, $135 million. But then on top of that, you still pay the drivers a load of money and all this. The bottom line is, yes, the cost cap is limiting things, but the teams effectively still spend as much money as they used to. They just spend them in different ways, and they try and find examples where they can, in the same way that Newey and even James Allison, right, at Mercedes, went to design boats for some time. It's kind of a similar theory here that says, well, you could maybe... It's effectively the same thing, right? Like, you're effectively doing the same type of thing as in Formula 1. It's just in water rather than on land. But the aerodynamics, the physics of it, very similar, right? So there could be, just hypothetically, some advantage for Ferrari building a boat and using some of that technical expertise in some of their, let's say, other sporting endeavours. Now, of course, you're not allowed to bring any ideas over to Formula 1, but who knows what's really happening behind the scenes. So that's just one thing to keep an eye on. But the SF25 has not delivered what the expectations were. Leclerc was told to lift off in Spain because he was going to wear his plank too much, and that was going to cause him to get disqualified, just like Hamilton did back in China. And in Canada, he was still lifting and coasting, not due to exactly the same reason, though, apparently, but due to the brakes being an issue. So again, we've got this thing with Ferrari and their brakes not being optimal. Of course, they use Brembo brakes, whereas Mercedes and Hamilton was used to Carbon Industries brakes for a decade and a half, basically his entire career. And that's the thing, we know that Hamilton's super strong on the brakes, which he is, and he still is at Ferrari, but it's a different type of brake that they're using in this car. has a different feel, has a different implication, and frankly has more issues, it seems. You know, the Brembo brakes that Red Bull had back in, was it Australia last year, that had those issues, right? And, you know, we've seen it a fair bit, even Ferrari, I think in Leclerc in Bahrain had all those lockups, and, you know, that was potentially clearly brake related. What the exact cause and issue was is a question. Brembo a lot of the time said, oh, you guys are setting it up wrong. Maybe that's true. And they've stuck with them, so it can't be the worst thing in the world. But the point is that they have had some issues. Fred Vasseur is optimistic for the Austrian Grand Prix just because it's going to be very fine margins, right? As he says, it takes a little over a minute for a Formula 1 car to go around the Spielberg circuit, which means the field is closely bunched in terms of lap time. Thousandths of a second can make a big difference. Managing to put everything together will be crucial. The fact that 7 of the 10 corners are right-handers combined with significant changes in elevation only adds to the challenge. We've been working hard in Maranello to deliver the best elements for the upcoming Grand Prix weekend. Whether that will work, we'll see. But Red Bull, they have a lot to think about as well. Max, could have won around here last year, and in effect he did win because he gained points on Lando after their crash, which was critical in terms of the overall championship fight. But it is going to be hot. That is the rumour anyway. I mean, we'll see what the weather actually does, but it doesn't look like we're going to be a massively disrupted weekend. It looks like it's going to be hot and sunny all weekend. Now, we know that in Canada, it was actually the Red Bull of all of the front runners who had the worst tyre degradation. There was a theory that maybe Max pushed a bit too hard, thinking that he would be able to out-tyre wear George, as it were, but that didn't happen. Mercedes looked after their tyres pretty well, and actually it was Max the one who was under pressure from Kimi Antonelli behind. So the Red Bull, maybe of all the teams, I'm sure Mercedes will be like, well, you know, let's hope things go to plan, right, in terms of their tyre degradation being better as it was in Canada, but it is a different type of circuit in Austria, and it's probably going to be even hotter. But it's not like the Red Bull fans are massively excited either, because the hot conditions also didn't seem to favour them, and it was their tyre deg that was a big question mark back in Canada, which meant they played a defensive race from start to finish. Now, Helmut Marko says there's an upgrade on the way for Austria and then a further one in Silverstone. So we know that Ferrari are bringing a new floor. We talked about that yesterday. They say that's a major upgrade in terms of what it means for the car. It may not mean major performance gains right now, but it's a major step in the direction they want to take with the SF25, which you might argue they never should have taken and just focused on next year. But, you know, that's maybe Hamilton's perspective. We'll see whether Ferrari got it right in a couple of weeks' time. But it does look like for the home Grand Prix, Max will have an upgrade on his car. Last year, he could well have won around here. Of course, his record around this circuit speaks for itself. It's unbelievably good, and I'm expecting Max to be right in the mix again this upcoming weekend. So should the McLarens be. I would not count out the Mercedes either. I think, especially over a lap, I expect them to be very much a force once again. Over the race, I'm still a little sceptical about Mercedes and their tyre degradation and things like this, certainly when it's really hot. We'll see. Ferrari, is, you know, again, they talk a good game, don't they? But until they show anything, then I'm not really going to believe it. So I'm still expecting a Max McLaren's Mercedes fight, really. Basically how it was back in Canada. I wouldn't be surprised to see something very similar here in Austria. Again, it is going to be fine margins at the end of the day, as we know, and track limits, as always, will be a conversation around this circuit. But there are going to be, you know, a suite of upgrades, right? So they have a few changes on the car, and we know that Red Bull said this from quite early on, that, look, they are going hard for this year, because I think they realise, Red Bull, on some level, that next year the chances of them winning the championship are very slim. And Max will be thinking about this, but it is worthy to just note real quick that next year's championship in 2026, the Ford engine, the Red Bull powertrains / Ford engine with the hybrid components, we know that Max, we know that Horner, we know that that Red Bull team has, let's say, made clear their criticisms of those regulations, and you might argue that they wouldn't do that if they were especially confident about it. Mercedes and Toto Wolff, you know, Toto might think the same thing as Horner does on these regulations and how poor they are in certain aspects, but he's not going to say that publicly. Toto's going to say, yeah, we can't possibly change the rules now. What are you talking about, guys? Even if the rules are terrible, because let's say, be real, Toto knows that his car's going to be pretty quick next year. That's anyway the theory. So I think Red Bull said relatively early on this season that given the circumstances with the engines and all the changes, I think they recognise that if Max is going to win another title, this year is likely his best chance in a Red Bull. I mean, maybe next year they nail it, but it might take them a couple of years to get back to where they want to be, and then maybe at that point Max has just retired and gone to another series, and maybe he's driving for Aston Martin or Mercedes or whatever, who even knows. But the point is that if Max is going to win another title with Red Bull, this is maybe the year that it is going to happen, and they said relatively early on they are going to pretty much go all in to make that happen. So I'm not surprised to see when McLaren, maybe in other teams' upgrades are starting to slow down, that Red Bull still have stuff in the pipeline, right? So they've got some new ideas. Of course, the gap in the championship, 40 or so points, is not disastrous. It's overturnable. But, Piastri's been so consistent, top 4, top 3, top 2, winning races every time, every qualifying session, every race, that he's just going to be very difficult to overhaul with the inconsistency of the Red Bull. But Austria's critical, right? It's been such a great Grand Prix track for Max. It's if he wins this weekend and Oscar's on the podium or down in 4th or whatever, maybe Mercedes are back in the mix, maybe Ferrari are back in the mix, all of a sudden the championship is very, very much still alive. So intrigued your thoughts in the comments below how that's going to work for Red Bull this weekend. But the other big drama at Red Bull was coming out of Sergio Perez. So they sacked him at the end of last year. It was controversial. I think what was very controversial is giving him the new contract in the first place, expecting that that would improve his performance. It effectively did the opposite. And it's difficult to really say exactly what happened to Perez. Was he great? No, and I don't think anyone is going to do revisionist history on that. But to be fair, at the start of 2022, he was at least respectable. At the start of 2023, won a couple of races. He was definitely respectable for the first few rounds there. We know what a great job he did for the team back in 2021, although he still wasn't that fast with respect to where, let's say, Bottas was on the Mercedes garage. But they got rid of him at the end of last season because performances just disappeared. And why that happened, I mean, it's largely down to the fact that as time went on, the car got faster, the car got snappier, the car got more the type of car that Max likes to drive. And it's the classic Red Bull scenario where the second driver, if they want to handle the car in the same way and unlock the same lap time as Max does, they have to push maybe harder than they would like to. That inevitably leads to some sort of a mistake, some sort of a crash, as we saw, let's say, with Tsunoda back in Imola. Then they lose a bit of confidence. Then they're driving under the limit because they're concerned the car's going to step out of them at any random moment. And then they're half a second off the pace. And all of a sudden this year, half a second off where Max is putting you down out in Q2 at the bare minimum. We've seen that over the last couple of years. There was a feeling that Perez apparently gave pretty good feedback to Red Bull in terms of, he was adamant that there were some issues with the car, but Red Bull didn't see it because Max was effectively masking them with just talent, and then eventually they did realise that, hang on a second, Checo was right. They had issues with last year's car, and they've got issues with this year's car as well. Now, could Perez's feedback have been better over time to prevent things getting away from him in the way that they did? Maybe. There's an argument that says that. But at the end of the day, Perez was axed, and it's not like anyone who's come in and said has done a better job, really, right? Lawson and Tsunoda. They've not, Perez was bad. He was bad. But it's not like the other guys have been any better. So Perez says, I know that deep down they regret their decision. And, I think they did it because they felt like it was the right thing to do and they would gain more performance and they would at least give themselves a chance to win the Constructors. The reality is they still don't have a chance to win the Constructors. And they had to pay him off a load of money to get rid of him, right? So I'm sure that they do regret it on some level. But as he says, they made certain decisions because of immense pressure that they themselves helped create. But I know deep down they regret it, and I know that from a very reliable source, which is very interesting because he says deep down, which kind of implies someone internal has either told him or someone who knows someone internal has told him that they wish they'd made a different decision. What can you do? You move on. It's tough. I've got very good friends there. And some people think I might take pleasure in what's happening, but no, I do not. And Perez goes on to talk about a few other things about the success that Max is having and the great team that they had. In the end, it slowly fell apart, but we really did have something special during one of the most competitive eras in Formula One. When Adrian left, that's when the problems really started, he says. So, yeah, fascinating from Perez, really a pretty strong claim to say, yeah, as far as he is aware, as far as he is concerned, they regret getting rid of me. The team fell apart little by little. In hindsight, should they have kept Perez? I don't know. I think given the circumstances, they made a reasonable decision. I think the mistake was to give him the new contract around Monaco time, expecting that would improve his performance, because that backfired massively. And if they hadn't done that, they wouldn't have to maybe pay him off the money that they did to get rid of him, because I think getting rid of Perez and bringing in somebody else hasn't proven to be a terrible decision in the sense that they're still in the same boat, right? Nothing's really changed. It's just the fact that they had to pay a load of money to get rid of Perez and probably lost all those sponsors. That's probably what's more regrettable rather than the actual performance. That's my opinion, but intrigued to your thoughts in the comments section below. And look, who knows what happens next? Maybe there's a chance that he goes to Cadillac. It is interesting just to look at that in Yuki's first 8 races with Red Bull, he scored 7 points and 3 Q3 appearances. very similar to what Perez scored in his last 8 races, right? Like, not much has really changed, let's be honest. But yeah, that's my perspective. Interested to your thoughts as ever in the comments. And who knows, maybe he is going to be back in the grid next year, the year after. Maybe Cadillac is a serious option. So very much interested to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.